The invitation, glossy and embossed with the aggressively cheerful logo of Marriage Unveiled, had arrived on a Tuesday, tucked innocuously between a bill and a circular for a new organic grocery. Eleanor Vance, Ellie to those few she allowed past her meticulously constructed perimeter, had stared at it, a frown etching itself between her brows. Liam, ever the enthusiast for anything that promised a shortcut to resolution, or perhaps a new audience, had been instantly captivated. Ellie, come on, it could be an adventure? He'd cajoled, his charming, boyish grin that once made her heart flutter, now feeling like a well-rehearsed performance. Think of it, a chance to really work through things with, experts. Experts in what, Liam? Public spectacle? She'd countered, her voice drier than the architectural plans spread across their reclaimed oak dining table in their Lincoln Park brownstone. The house itself, a monument to her precision and their once shared vision, now felt like a beautifully appointed stage for a play whose script she no longer understood. But Liam, a senior marketing executive whose professional life revolved around persuasive narratives, had a way of framing even the most dubious propositions as opportunities. He'd spoken of reconnection, of a fresh perspective, of tackling the unspoken chill that had settled between them, like the persistent damp off Lake Michigan in late autumn. He hadn't, of course, mentioned the real reasons for the chill. His increasing absences, the vague explanations, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirts, a scent she'd meticulously cataloged and filed away in the vault of her anxieties. And so, against every rational instinct that had guided her successful career as an architect, against the deep-seated fear of vulnerability inherited from a childhood spent observing her parents' impeccably maintained but emotionally barren marriage, Ellie had agreed. Part of her, the part that still clung to the blueprint of their early love, whispered that perhaps this audacious, unconventional step was the jolt their marriage needed. Another, more cynical part, suspected Liam was merely seeking a new platform, a new distraction. The Marriage Unveiled studio, located in a sleek, anonymous tower in downtown Chicago, was a masterpiece of controlled artifice. Cool blues and grays dominated the color palette, punctuated by strategically placed cameras that seemed to blink with predatory intelligence. The air hummed with a low-grade tension, a mixture of feigned intimacy and the raw, unspoken anxieties of the couples who passed through its doors. Dr. Julian Croft, the show's host, was a figure of unnerving charisma. His eyes, a piercing, intelligent gray, seemed to see not just through people, but into the carefully guarded recesses of their souls. He moved with a languid grace, his voice a soothing baritone that could, in an instant, sharpen to a scalpel's edge. His reputation preceded him, a media psychologist who peeled back layers of marital discord with a surgeon's precision, often leaving his subjects raw and exposed. But, his proponents argued, ultimately closer to a difficult truth. The first few sessions were a blur of probing questions and carefully constructed responses. Ellie, accustomed to control, found herself disoriented by the relentless scrutiny. She spoke of communication breakdowns, of differing career pressures, of the slow erosion of shared dreams. Liam, initially glib and charming, grew more subdued under Dr. Croft's unwavering gaze. The studio lights felt hot, invasive. The meticulously designed set, intended to resemble a high-end therapist's office, felt more like an interrogation room. "Eleanor," Dr. Croft said one afternoon, his voice soft, almost conspiratorial, "you speak of your marriage as if it's one of your architectural projects, a structure to be maintained, flaws to be aesthetically concealed. But what about the foundation, Eleanor? Is it sound?" Ellie's hands clenched in her lap. The question, seemingly innocuous, landed like a physical blow. She glanced at Liam, who was studying his cuticles with an intensity usually reserved for quarterly reports. The silence in the studio stretched, amplified by the almost imperceptible hum of the cameras. We've had challenges," she managed, her voice tighter than she intended. "All marriages do." "Indeed," Dr. Croft mused, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "But some challenges, some secrets, can act like termites, hollowing out the structure from within until only a fragile facade remains. Wouldn't you agree, Liam?" Liam looked up, startled, a flicker of something unreadable. Fear? Guilt? In his eyes. I guess so. We're here to work on those things." The air in their Lincoln Park brownstone grew heavier with each passing day of filming. The carefully curated harmony of their home felt increasingly like a lie. Ellie found herself wandering through the rooms, her architect's eye no longer seeing the beauty of the crown moldings or the perfect flow of space, but rather the cracks, literal and metaphorical. She'd always prided herself on her ability to see the underlying structure of things, to anticipate stress point design solutions. Yet, in her own marriage, she had been blind, or perhaps willfully ignorant. The city outside, with its imposing skyline and relentless energy, seemed to mock her internal disarray. Chicago in early November was a study in gray: the sky, the lake, the mood. The wind off the water was sharp, carrying the scent of impending winter, a chill that mirrored the one seeping into her bones. She remembered a time when she and Liam would walk along the lakefront, hands clasped, their laughter carried away by the breeze, their future stretching before them, as vast and promising as the horizon. Now, the horizon felt like a rapidly closing wall. Ava Chen, her best friend since their chaotic, hopeful college days, called regularly from San Francisco. Ava, a pragmatic graphic designer with a no-nonsense attitude and a fiercely loyal heart, was her anchor. "Ellie, are you sure about this show?" Ava had asked, her voice laced with concern. "It sounds like a public flaying. What if it makes things worse?" "Maybe things need to get worse before they can get better," Ellie had replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Or maybe," she'd added, a bitter laugh escaping her, "I just want to know what's really going on. I'm tired of designing around a void." The void. That was what it felt like. A growing emptiness where connection used to be. Liam was a master of evasion, of deflecting her tentative questions with a charming smile or a sudden, urgent work commitment. His phone, once casually left on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket, guarded like a state secret. The late nights at the office, the unexplained credit card charges, the subtle shifts in his behavior. Each was a small, sharp stone in the wall he was building between them. She remembered the dream they'd once shared of starting a family. It had been deferred, first for her career, then for his. Now, the thought of bringing a child into this uncertain landscape felt like an act of profound irresponsibility. The dream, like so many others, lay dormant, covered by the dust of unspoken resentments and unaddressed fears. The day of the pivotal recording session dawned cold and overcast, the Chicago sky a bruised purple. Ellie felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach, a premonition she couldn't shake. She dressed with her usual care, a tailored charcoal dress, understated silver jewelry, a uniform designed to project composure, to armor herself against the unknown. Liam was unusually quiet during the drive to the studio, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He offered a strained smile when she caught him looking at her, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ready for another round with Dr. Freud?" he attempted, his voice too bright, too forced. Ellie merely nodded, her own reserves of feigned normalcy depleted. The studio felt colder than usual, the lights more intense. Dr. Croft greeted them with his customary polished affability, but there was an undercurrent in his demeanor, a subtle shift in energy that set Ellie's nerves on edge. They began, as usual, with a recap of their previous discussions. Dr. Croft guided them through a labyrinth of their shared history, his questions probing, relentless. Ellie felt like a specimen under a microscope, every word, every gesture analyzed and cataloged. Then, Dr. Croft leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Liam. "Liam," he began, his voice dropping to that familiar ominous softness. "We've talked about communication, about emotional distance. But sometimes distance is just a matter of unspoken words. Sometimes it's created by actions taken outside the marriage." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She saw Liam's face pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The camera zoomed in, silent, merciless. "I'm not sure what you mean, Doctor," Liam said, his voice a fraction too steady. Dr. Croft's smile was devoid of warmth. "Oh, I think you do, Liam. We've spoken with a colleague of yours, a Miss Chloe Sanders." The name hung in the air, electric, damning. Chloe Sanders, junior marketing associate, young, ambitious, with bright, eager eyes. Ellie had met her once briefly at a company holiday party, a fleeting impression of vibrant energy and a lingering, expensive perfume. The same perfume she'd occasionally, inexplicably smelled on Liam's clothes. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. The studio, the lights, Dr. Croft's calm, predatory face, it all seemed to recede, replaced by a roaring in her ears. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. Miss Sanders was quite forthcoming, Dr. Croft continued, his voice a silken thread tightening around Liam's composure. She shared details of a rather significant connection, one that extended beyond office hours, one that involved hotel rooms, Liam, and promises. Liam's carefully constructed facade shattered. He stammered, his eyes darting towards Ellie, then away, unable to meet her gaze. This is an ambush. This isn't fair. Fair? Dr. Croft's eyebrow arched. Is infidelity fair, Liam? Is leading a double life fair to your wife who sits beside you, believing you're here to repair your marriage? He turned his attention to Ellie, his expression softening into one of carefully calibrated sympathy. Eleanor, I know this is devastating, but the truth, however painful, is the only foundation upon which genuine healing can be built. Ellie sat frozen, the world tilting on its axis. Devastating. The word was an insult, a clinical, detached summary of the cataclysm unfolding within her. It was a public vivisection of her life, her trust, her very identity. The meticulous architect, the woman who prided herself on control and foresight, had built her life on a lie, a beautifully designed structure with a rotten core. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She could feel the gaze of the cameras, the unseen audience, the weight of their judgment. Her carefully guarded composure, her lifelong defense mechanism, crumbled. A sob escaped her, raw and animalistic, a sound torn from the deepest recesses of her pain. Liam finally looked at her, his face a mask of shame and panic. Ellie, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. Her voice was a ragged whisper, disbelief warring with a tidal wave of fury. You're having an affair, Liam, with Chloe Sanders, and you brought me here to this circus to be humiliated on national television? The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest, stealing her breath. Each beat of her heart seemed to echo the word. Betrayed, betrayed, betrayed. The brownstone they'd lovingly restored, the shared dreams, the years of her life invested in this man, this marriage, it all felt like ashes in her mouth. Dr. Croft, ever the master of ceremonies, allowed the raw emotion to play out for a moment, the cameras lapping it up. Then, he interjected, his voice a calm counterpoint to the storm. Eleanor, Liam, this is undoubtedly a crisis point. But crises can also be opportunities for radical honesty, for dismantling the old and perhaps building something new, or for recognizing when something is irreparably broken. Ellie barely heard him. Her mind was a maelstrom of images, Liam's furtive glances, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the scent of that damned perfume. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain, a confirmation of her own blindness, her own foolish hope. She looked at Liam, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. The charming, persuasive man she had married seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger. A weak, deceitful stranger who had shattered her world with casual cruelty. A cold, hard clarity began to pierce through the fog of her shock. This was not a foundation for rebuilding. This was a demolition site. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Ellie rose to her feet, her legs unsteady but resolute. The studio lights seemed to bear down on her, but for the first time, she didn't flinch. I'm done, she said, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through the charged atmosphere. I'm done with this show, and I'm done with this charade. She didn't look at Liam. She couldn't. The sight of him, his face contorted in a pathetic attempt at remorse, would only fuel the inferno raging within her. She turned and walked away from the set, away from Dr. Croft's calculating gaze, away from the prying eyes of the cameras, away from the ruins of her marriage. Each step was an act of rebellion, a reclaiming of her shattered self. The sound of her heels clicking on the polished studio floor was the only sound that mattered, a rhythm of escape, a drumbeat of a future she could not yet imagine, but one that, she knew with sudden, chilling certainty, would not include Liam. The heavy studio door closed behind her with a definitive thud, a punctuation mark on the end of a chapter she had never wanted to write. The days that followed were a blur of numb disbelief and searing pain. The brownstone, once her sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum, each object a haunting reminder of a life that was no longer hers. Liam's attempts to speak to her, his desperate apologies whispered through the closed bedroom door, were met with a wall of silence. She couldn't bear the sound of his voice, the sight of his face. He was a stranger, an architect of her ruin. The public fallout was swift and brutal. Snippets of the show, carefully edited for maximum drama, appeared online. Headlines screamed of betrayal and heartbreak. Ellie, a private person by nature, found herself at the center of a sordid public spectacle. The shame was a corrosive acid, eating away at her already frayed composure. She unplugged her phone, avoided the news, and retreated into a self-imposed exile within the four walls of her home. Work was impossible. The precise, logical world of architecture, her usual refuge, felt alien and inaccessible. How could she design structures for others when her own life had been so spectacularly deconstructed? Her colleagues, no doubt aware of the scandal, sent tentative messages of support, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. Ava was her lifeline. Her friend's voice, pragmatic and unwavering, cut through the fog of Ellie's despair. "Screw them, Ellie," Ava said, her voice crackling with indignation over the phone from San Francisco. "Screw Liam, screw that parasitic Croft, screw the whole damn show. This is not your shame, this is his." "But I was there, Ava," Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I let this happen. I was so blind." "You weren't blind, Elle. You were trusting. There's a difference. He exploited that. That's on him, not you." Sleep offered no escape, only a restless landscape of fragmented nightmares. The image of Liam's face, pale and guilty, intertwined with Chloe Sanders' bright, oblivious smile. Dr. Croft's piercing gaze, dissecting her pain for public consumption. She would wake with a gasp, her heart pounding, the sheets twisted around her, the crushing weight of reality settling back in. The carefully ordered world she had cultivated, the world where everything had its place, where emotions were managed and appearances maintained, had been obliterated. In its place was a chaotic wasteland of grief, anger, and profound disillusionment. She felt adrift, untethered, a ship without a rudder in a raging storm. Her mother, Carol, called, her voice a mixture of concern and a bewildered, old-fashioned disapproval. "Eleanor, dear, I saw something online. It can't be true, can it? Marriages go through rough patches. You need to. Work it out. Forgive and forget." Ellie listened, a hollow ache in her chest. Forgive? Forget? How could she forget the public evisceration of her life? How could she forgive the man who had orchestrated it, however passively? "Mom," she said, her voice flat, devoid of inflection, "it's not that simple." The conversation was stilted, unsatisfying. Her mother, a product of a generation that prized stoicism and discretion above all else, couldn't comprehend the depth of Ellie's wound, the public nature of her humiliation. Days turned into a week, then two. Liam eventually moved out, taking his belongings and his suffocating presence with him. The silence he left behind was vast, echoing, but also, strangely, a relief. Ellie wandered through the empty rooms, the silence a canvas upon which her grief painted its desolate landscapes. One gray Chicago morning, staring out at the skeletal branches of the trees in Lincoln Park, a fragile thought took root. She couldn't stay like this, drowning in the wreckage. Ava had been right. This was not entirely her shame to bear. She had been a victim of deceit, of manipulation, of a cruel public spectacle. But she would not remain a victim. The first step was the hardest. She found the card for Dr. Lena Hansen, a therapist Ava had recommended, her name sourced through a network of supportive women. Making the call felt like admitting defeat, a concession that she couldn't fix this on her own. But as she spoke to the calm, reassuring voice on the other end of the line, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile as a newborn flame, ignited within her. Dr. Hansen's office was a quiet sanctuary, a world away from the sterile glare of the Marriage Unveiled studio. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, walls adorned with abstract art that invited contemplation rather than judgment. Dr. Hansen herself was a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that nonetheless conveyed an underlying strength. The first few sessions were a torrent of pain and anger. Ellie recounted the story, the words tumbling out, raw and unfiltered. She wept, she raged, she dissected every moment, every betrayal, searching for an explanation, for a way to make sense of the senseless. Dr. Hansen listened patiently, offering not easy answers, but a space for Ellie to explore the complex layers of her grief. "It's natural to feel anger, Eleanor," Dr. Hansen said, her voice calm and steady. "Anger is a powerful emotion. It can be destructive, yes, but it can also be a catalyst for change. It tells us that our boundaries have been violated, that something is deeply wrong." Slowly, painstakingly, Ellie began to unpack the baggage of her marriage, her childhood, her own ingrained patterns of behavior. She confronted her fear of failure, her tendency to prioritize appearances over authentic connection, her avoidance of conflict. She saw how her need for control, born from a desire to avoid the emotional chaos of her parents' marriage, had inadvertently contributed to the distance between her and Liam. It didn't excuse his betrayal, not by a long shot, but it offered a more nuanced understanding of the complex dynamics that had led them to this point. "You built a beautiful facade, Eleanor," Dr. Hansen observed one day, "because you were afraid of what lay beneath, afraid of the messiness, the unpredictability of genuine intimacy. The words resonated deeply. Ellie had always equated vulnerability with weakness. Now she was beginning to understand that true strength lay in the courage to be vulnerable, to be seen, imperfections and all. Liam, in the meantime, was navigating his own private hell. The public scandal had consequences. His career, once on a meteoric rise, stalled. Whispers followed him in the corridors of his office. Chloe Sanders, caught in the crossfire, had quietly resigned, her own ambitions tainted by the affair. Liam sent Ellie occasional, pleading emails, filled with remorse and promises of change. She read them, her heart a cold, hard knot. The trust, once shattered, felt impossible to rebuild. His words, once so persuasive, now sounded hollow, self-serving. She saw him once, unexpectedly, at a small cafe near her old office, a place they used to frequent. He looked diminished, his usual confidence replaced by a haunted, weary expression. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. She saw a flicker of hope in his, a desperate plea. She offered a brief, cool nod, then turned away. There was nothing left to say. The healing was a slow, arduous process, marked by setbacks and moments of profound despair. There were days when the weight of her grief felt unbearable, when the future seemed a vast, empty expanse. But there were also moments of grace, of clarity. A walk along the lakefront, the crisp winter air clearing her head. A shared laugh with Ava over a ridiculous memory. The quiet satisfaction of sketching a new design, a small personal project just for herself. She began to reclaim her space, both literally and metaphorically. She rearranged the furniture in the brownstone, packing away the remnants of her life with Liam, creating a space that felt truly her own. She started exercising again, feeling the strength return to her body, a physical manifestation of her growing inner resilience. One afternoon, sorting through old boxes, she found a collection of her childhood drawings. Fantastical houses, whimsical gardens, bold, imaginative structures. They were a reminder of a time before the need for control, before the fear of failure had taken root. A time when she had dared to dream without constraints. Spring arrived in Chicago, tentative at first, then bursting forth in a riot of color and life. The ice on Lake Michigan retreated, revealing the deep, enduring blue beneath. Ellie watched the transformation, a sense of quiet hope stirring within her. Like the city, she was emerging from a long, hard winter. She made a decision about the brownstone. It held too many ghosts, too many painful memories. She put it on the market, the sale a symbolic severing of the final tie to her old life. With the proceeds, she found a smaller apartment in a different neighborhood, a blank canvas upon which to paint her future. The divorce was finalized with a quiet lack of drama, a stark contrast to the public spectacle that had precipitated it. There was a sense of sadness, of loss for the dreams that had died, but also a profound sense of relief, of liberation. She started her own small architectural firm, focusing on sustainable, community-oriented projects. It was a risk, a departure from the corporate world she had known, but it felt right, authentic. Her work became a source of passion, of purpose. She poured her energy into creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but also nurturing, healing. There were still days when the phantom limb of her past life ached, when a wave of sadness would wash over her. The scars remained, a testament to the pain she had endured, but they no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, a reminder of her resilience, of her capacity to survive, to heal, to rebuild. One crisp autumn evening, a year after the marriage unveiled debacle, Ellie sat on the small balcony of her new apartment, overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, a smell she now associated not with endings, but with the cyclical nature of life, with the promise of renewal. She thought of Dr. Julian Croft, of the ruthless ambition that drove him, the human wreckage he left in his wake. She felt a pang of pity, not for herself, but for him, for a life spent dissecting the pain of others, without ever truly understanding the quiet strength found in healing. She thought of Liam, hoping he too had found some measure of peace, some understanding of the devastation he had wrought. Ava called, her voice bright and cheerful. "So, how's the new venture, boss lady?" Ellie smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. "It's good, Ava. Hard work, but good. I feel lighter." "Lighter is good," Ava said. "You sound it." They talked for a while, their conversation easy, familiar, a comforting rhythm in the quiet evening. As she hung up, Ellie looked out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Chicago, once the backdrop to her public humiliation, now felt like a city of new beginnings. She had walked through fire, had her life dismantled before the world, But she had emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, more authentically herself. The illusion of a perfect life, the meticulously constructed facade, had been shattered. In its place was something far more valuable. A hard-won understanding of her own worth, a deep appreciation for genuine connection, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing she could face the storms of life and not just survive, but ultimately find her own way to the light. The lessons had been brutal, the journey arduous, but Ellie Vance, the architect of her own renewed life, was finally at peace, standing on a foundation built not of illusion, but of truth. And it was, she realized, a far more beautiful and enduring structure than any she had ever designed before.